All right, well, why don't we go ahead and get started. Good afternoon again, and welcome to the Ops Track. This is a really interesting session. The elephant in the Kubernetes room, team interactions at scale. Very, very kind of timely topic, I think, also. And we're lucky enough to have Manuel Pais, co-author of Team Topologies, here to give us a run-through. So, Manuel, thank you.
Thank you so much. First of all, thank you everyone for attending this talk, the last afternoon of the last day of KubeCon North America. I appreciate that. So we've had so many great talks about Kubernetes and engineering activities around Kubernetes in the last days. And there's also countless great articles online about what different companies are doing using Kubernetes. But often what you see is they'll have a very one sentence or one paragraph about who we are, what are the teams involved, and then they'll jump straight into the technology part. What have we done, what have we achieved on the technical side. And so that always puzzles me a little bit, because I find that the way teams are set up, how they interact, how is the technology being provided to other teams is really fundamental to the success and the adoption of new technology, in particular Kubernetes. So in this talk, you're not going to get any technical insights. I'm sorry if that's what you're looking for, but I guess not. And I'm going to talk a little bit about, is Kubernetes really a platform? And then looking a little bit at the history of DevOps and this kind of equilibrium. We'll see what is team cognitive load and why it matters in this context. And finally, we'll look at some kind of healthy team interactions and kind of more explicit ways that teams can think about how they interact with each other. So a couple of days ago, actually, during the keynotes here, I confess I was having this Twitter conversation, and basically I had said, I was impressed with how big the conference was, and a breakout room is like 500,000 people. And so Zeb Palmer replied, and I think this is a very accurate and pragmatic answer, and he was here as well, and he said, there's always a next new thing, the next big thing. So just yesterday, we were at the OpenStack conference, and I also hear that DockerCon doesn't get as many people anymore. So this is typical evolution in technology, and that's how the industry has evolved and progressed and get more benefits from the technology that we use. So as organizations, we should be expecting to deal with this. What's the next big thing? We should expect that. And kind of what I'm trying to say is we should try to be more adaptive rather than go for this big transformation or big reorganization because now we want to be DevOps or we want to adopt Kubernetes, whatever it might be. So as was mentioned, I co-wrote this book, Team Topologies, with Matthew Skelton, published by IT Revolution Press from Gene Kim, who wrote Phoenix Project and DevOps Handbook and so on. So we talk about different patterns for types of teams, the expected behaviors and interactions and so on, but kind of the ultimate outcome that we would like to get from organizations looking at team topologies, how do we become more of a living organism that can adapt and kind of morph to take in new technology and new practices rather than going through this kind of major transformation into a whole new animal, if you like. So let's start by discussing a little bit, is Kubernetes a platform? Obviously, it depends how you define platform, right? So we'll look at that. And before, I'd like to take you to explain a little bit this story. So back in March this year, I was at KubeCon in London, and Melanie Cibula from Airbnb gave this great talk about how they've adopted Kubernetes. And I wrote this piece for InfoQ, so I've been an editor for them for many years. And I knew this would get some attention because Kubernetes and because Unicorn, Airbnb, Google, et cetera, always gets attention. But what happened was that we got 23,000 page views in 1 week. So for you to have an idea, the usual number of views for a story throughout its whole lifetime is 1/10 of this. So this was like a proper viral kind of story. And so I was thinking about why did this story in particular pick up the interest from so many people? And I believe it's the fact that they were able to scale this approach which we're going to look at during this talk, for so many engineers, 1,000+ engineers. And because across many organizations, many people are finding it difficult to use Kubernetes for the work they need to do in deploying and running their services. Because it actually has a kind of steep learning curve, right? It takes a while before people feel comfortable with this new technology. And so I believe that's the reason that attracted so much attention. And we know that Kubernetes as a platform, if you like, helps us manage the complexity of microservices, scale up and down, orchestrate, all this great stuff that we need. And it also provides reasonably good abstractions for deployment and runtime of the services, right? So that's all good, that's all helpful. But there's a lot more going on, right? And I'm sure you know better than me all these other tasks that you need to think about. How do we set up the hosts for the clusters? If we need to update a new version of Kubernetes, how do we do that? If we have to decide on namespaces versus clusters for isolation of services and environments and so on. So you can insert your favorite or least favorite task here. The point being that there's this whole bunch of activity going on as well. So do we know who is responsible for this type of tasks? And also, very importantly, do we know who is impacted? If this is like an afterthought, if it's not clearly stated for everyone, then you're probably going to run into friction when teams should be adopting Kubernetes. They're going to find it difficult to understand what they need to do. So I think it's good to have a definition of a platform. And I like this one from Evan Butcher. So he's saying a digital platform is a foundation of self-service APIs, tools, and services. That's kind of common sense. But also the knowledge and support, which are arranged as a compelling internal product. So there are two things that stand out for me here. So he's talking about knowledge and support. So that kind of implies that we need a team around this platform. We need to provide good documentation, and we need people that can help the users understand and adopt the platform. And the other point is that it should be a compelling internal product. So this implies that it's not a mandatory platform that we impose on all the teams. This is the way that you're going to work now. We're looking at it as a product, so that means we want to make it appealing for our internal users. That means the platform should really make it very easy to do the right thing for most use cases and most teams. So we're not talking about kind of the old school kind of black box where we put all kind of shared service in there, and then we don't even know what the platform does or how they run, or how to use them. We're talking about a compelling internal product. So what I'm trying to say here is that Kubernetes itself is not your platform. It's a foundation. It provides a lot of the functionality that we need. But actually, if you look at this definition, what you need is setting up the team, setting up the support and the knowledge, and for everyone to be able to adopt this platform in an easy way. So of course, to validate this, I need a tweet from Kelsey Hightower, right? Who, by the way, had a great keynote a few days ago. So he was saying a few weeks ago that he could do 95% of what Cloud Native does with VMs, application service, and configuration management. And if he had to do it all over again, he might use Kubernetes, but would be kind of an implementation detail behind the change management system. So when he talks about change management system here, I think about the platform and actually the workflows that the platform supports and provides to our internal teams, right? So he's saying, you could be Kubernetes or whatever you use, Cloud Foundry, OpenShift, whatever it is. The point being that the actual platform needs to have a kind of a wrapper around this that is specific to our organization. So we get into the question of who is then responsible for this platform. So if we look back at kind of the history of DevOps, when it started 10 years ago, this movement was really to address this problem, where we had development group and the operations group isolated. Sometimes the operations group was outsourced to a third-party company even, and so people didn't know each other, and the communication was through tickets or other kinds of formal requests, right, for any kind of infrastructure change and so on. So this was the essential problem that DevOps was trying to address, and what they were saying is, you need to actually sit together, know each other, and discover the good solutions for the problems that are affecting the both groups around deployment, scaling, monitoring, etc. So that was the basic premise of DevOps. And then we got all the tools that help us and are great, but kind of the basic idea was this. And over the last 10 years, especially the last 5 years or so, we've had also research around DevOps practices and what helps teams become more performant. In particular, the State of DevOps report. So now there are 2 from Google and Puppet Labs. And this knowledge was condensed in this book, Accelerate, also from IT Revolution by Dr. Nicole Forsgren, Jess Humble, and Jin Kim. And what they did is, first they're using statistical methods to analyze data from these surveys, and they found out which practices correlate highly with high-performing teams. And one of the things that came out is that actually the teams that are cross-functional and have multiple skills in the life cycle of their application, so that they're able essentially to take their service or application from inception until it's live in production and running and monitoring it and taking feedback quickly into the next iteration of the product are the most effective. That the ones that can respond faster to incidents, the ones that can deliver changes more quickly. So this is kind of our ideal type of product team, right? So what happens when we introduce Kubernetes? I love elephants, and I think of Kubernetes as kind of an elephant, right? It's not a small thing that you plug into your workflow and you use, right? It's a big thing. It gives us a lot, but it's a big change. So what are we going to do then? Assuming we have this kind of cross-functional teams, full stack, if you like, are we going to say, well, you're full stack, so now you take on Kubernetes as well, and you set up your own clusters and all the tooling and everything you need? That's probably not going to work, right? So the red color here, it's not by accident. It's going to get bloody there for this team. So they wouldn't be able to continue to deliver the features that they're focused on from a business point of view. And if we have this kind of structure where we still have an ops group and a development group, even if they're collaborating regularly with DevOps, but where does Kubernetes fit in? So if we're saying, well, the ops team is responsible for the operational side, so you take on the Kubernetes load, this is probably not going to work so well either. So for the record, I'm not recommending this, because we take the risk of now these 2 groups are, again, speaking different languages, focusing on different things. One group is the cool Kubernetes team, and they're focused on that. And the development teams are focused on whatever is the new JavaScript or React framework or whatever. So you don't want this isolation, because actually the value for the business is in the intersection, right? Is when we're able to deliver and run our services efficiently. So if these are not good approaches, what else can we do? It's important to introduce at this point the idea of team cognitive load. So cognitive load, the definition is the total amount of mental effort being used in the working memory. And it can be broken down into 3 different types of cognitive load. Okay? So we have intrinsic cognitive load. That means if I need some skills for my day-to-day work and I don't have them, then I'm going to take effort in my memory to actually find out, how do I write this class, or how do I write this test, or if I'm learning a new language, that's going to increase my intrinsic cognitive load. But we know how to reduce that. We know through training, pair programming, mentoring, dojos, whatever techniques you use, we can upskill people and reduce the intrinsic cognitive load. And then we have extraneous cognitive load, where it's related to the mechanics of what we're doing. So how do I deploy my application? How do I access the test environment? This kind of activities that we need to do to get the outcome that we're looking for, but are not directly related to the business outcome, right? And then we have the germane cognitive load. So it's everything around the business domain, the kind of problems we're trying to solve for our users, or new functionality we're trying to deliver. So you can imagine what we're trying to do, or should be trying to do, is reduce as much as possible intrinsic and extraneous cognitive load, so we leave more space available for Germain and focusing on the business outcomes, the kind of value add for our organization. And so the question then is, how do we reduce extraneous cognitive load? And that's where platforms come in and how we use them. So there's this famous quote, right? The best part of my day is when I update 10 different YAML files to deploy a one-line code change. Said no one ever. And this is an example of extraneous cognitive load. So you're trying to achieve some outcome with that code change, but you have to do all this extraneous work to get it done. And you have to understand the syntax of these files, which configurations you need, and so on. So I mentioned Airbnb, that Airbnb story. So what they did was they provide a small tool that allows teams to focus on the specific configuration that is important for their projects or their services. So they don't have to deal with all the YAML files anymore. They focus on what is specific to our project that we need to configure and decide. So that's what you have there on the left. And then they use this tool called KubeGen, which generates all the YAML files for all the different environments that they need. So development, canary, and production. And then applies this to whatever cluster is assigned to that project or service. So what they're doing here is really clarifying the boundaries of this platform that they're using, and providing higher level abstractions for their teams, for their development teams, so that they actually reduce the cognitive load. It's much easier to understand and to use this little KubeGen tool than thinking about all the YAML files that they need to change. And that's where this kind of intersects with the book, in the sense that we talk about this kind of patterns. And we have 4 types of teams that we think are the fundamental for any software organization or technology organization, which are stream-aligned teams, kind of the product team, but sometimes you're working on a stream of work that is not really a whole product, so that's the reason. Enabling teams help upskill the stream teams, provide them knowledge and reduced learning curve around whatever domains, test automation, logging, what have you. Complicated subsystem teams and platform teams. So for the purpose of this talk, we're focusing on stream teams that kind of provide the heartbeat of delivering value to the business, if you like, and the platform team, which is really kind of shielding the stream teams from having to know the internals of the platform, of the internal services that they use. So this service can be anything from logging, monitoring, deployment, etc. So in this context, the platform team has a very specific and clear purpose, which is to enable the stream teams to be more autonomous with self-service capabilities. And very importantly, the goal is to reduce the extraneous cognitive load of the stream teams. So having this very clear purpose helps drive certain kinds of behaviors and thinking about the platform in specific ways. In particular, we want to treat the platform as a product, as we've seen before. And more specifically, this means the platform should be at least reliable, fit for purpose, and focused on the developer experience. So more concretely, a reliable platform means that we also have on-call support for the platform, because those services, those internal services, are on the path to production, if you like. So they're not production, but if I depend on the platform for my logging and monitoring and so on, if I have a problem in production, then if those services are not running as expected, then it's going to affect my capacity to respond to incidents in production, right? So we should have an on-call support for a platform. We should have status pages that clearly indicate what's the current status, availability of different services, specify what are the expected or suitable communication channels for teams to report incidents in the platform or ask questions or provide feedback. Make this clear for everyone so it's easy to provide that information. The response time for incidents in the platform should also be clear. And if you have downtime or at least degraded performance because you're upgrading a cluster to new Kubernetes version or what have you, these things should be announced and planned. And find out if anyone's going to be impacted. So we shouldn't just assume it's OK to do this. In terms of fitness for purpose of the platform, we would expect then the platform team to prototype. So they're not going in for 3 months, work on a new service in isolation, then come back and say, here you are. That has never worked. And it's not going to work for the platform either. So we expect them to have a more agile, iterative approach where they get regular feedback from the stream teams. Is this service looking like what you need? And so we're not working for a long time until we deliver something. We do it iteratively. And we can apply good practices like TDD, pair programming, what have you. And critically, we want to focus on having as few services as possible of higher quality. Like I said before, not the platforms of old that we just put all kinds of services in a shared platform, but actually the fewer services, the higher the quality we can provide. And we know, we understand those services better. And all this requires good product management skills. So understanding, what are the different priorities for the teams? How do we set up a roadmap? How do we communicate that to our users? And finally, the platform needs to be focused on the developer experience. This means it needs to speak the same language as the development teams in your organization. So often this means having command line-based tools like in Airbnb, but perhaps in some organizations, their developers are used to more graphical interface approach, and so we should cater to that. And very importantly, look for the right level of abstractions for your engineering teams. That's what Airbnb did. And whatever technology that you use, it's not going to be providing the specific abstractions that make more sense for your organization. This is contextual. It depends on which teams you have, which maturity they have, and how they like to work. And in general, the principle of keeping it simple as much as possible and reduce complexity, at least in terms of the usage of the platform. Sometimes you might take a cost it's more complex to make it easier to use. It's kind of sounds strange, but that might happen, and that's OK. So Adam Jacob, who created Chef, last week had this tweet which got me thinking because he's comparing the user experience of Docker with Kubernetes. And regardless of what you think about it, I'm not sure Kubernetes is in the business of making the user experience great for everyone, because with such a large user base, that's basically impossible. And like I was saying, the user experience or the developer experience depends on where your developers and engineers are at today. So it's contextual to your organization. So I think you always need the platform. And in your internal platform, you need to focus on the user experience. Obviously, Kubernetes should be thinking about a good developer experience as well, but they're not going to be able to provide the best experience for everyone. That's basically impossible. So there's one example that I really like from Twilio around getting feedback and asking feedback from the platform users, the engineering teams. So what they do is, I believe every quarter, they run a Net Promoter Score survey with their internal teams and ask them, how easy, how comfortable do you feel using the platform to build, deploy, and run your services? And also importantly, is it compelling? Do you feel that you can provide feedback easily, that we incorporate changes that make it easier to use, and in general that the platform is getting better and providing better services? This is a great example of reaching out and proactively looking to make sure the platform stays a compelling internal product. But all this, even if we have the best platform, depends then how teams interact. So in the example from Airbnb, looking at it from the Team Topologies perspective, essentially they have a platform, right, which is abstracting the details from how they're running Kubernetes and essentially providing a much smaller surface of the service that the development teams are using. So they're focusing on much smaller set of configuration and artifacts in order to deploy their changes using this KubeGen service. And this is what's really driving down the cognitive load for development teams, allowing them to focus on the business outcomes. So we need to be aware of the expected behaviors from teams. So the platform, if we're working on a new service or evolution of an existing service, we would expect in the beginning there would be strong collaboration with the stream team that needs this new service. So we expect, perhaps we're going to time box a period of time where we expect to explicitly collaborate and dedicate the effort to do that, to find out, how should the service, which should be the inputs and outputs of this service, what is the right interface and abstraction, so we can work on that together. And then as the service becomes more stable, we would expect the platform team to focus more on stability, providing good support, great documentation, which is very important as well. So if you need to hire a technical writer for the platform, or you need to send people in technical writing trainings, you should do that, because documentation should not be an afterthought. It's very important to make it easier to adopt the platform by the stream teams. So thinking about this kind of alternating between collaboration, X as a service, and making this more visible and more explicit for everyone. So you avoid kind of awkward interactions where one team is expecting something from the platform and it's not there. Now, this doesn't mean that are we hiding the whole Kubernetes and the development teams should not know anything about it, about the details. That's not what we mean. We know that there's Kubernetes running underneath, and that's fine. We should actually promote, if the development teams are interested and the engineers in Kubernetes, and for example, they know there's some new functionality coming in Kubernetes version X, they should reach out to the platform and talk about when and how should we adopt this new functionality that could be useful for us. That's fine. So for example, you might have a development team that needs, let's say, a new metrics service where I need my metrics for my service in a machine-readable format so I can process into some dashboard that my clients want to see, for example. So if you look at this is loosely based on that example from Airbnb. They have these different services, and we're saying, well, we want to work on this new service. So we expect this kind of pattern to take place, where the development team and the platform team will collaborate strongly in the beginning to understand what exactly do you need, what should be the format, how do you run this. And at some point, it starts to become clearer up to the last phase where we establish this service. Okay, it's now stable. We understand the boundaries, how you're going to use it, and it becomes available to everyone else in the organization. All the other teams can use it. So we're using it as, consuming it as a service. And so we've just extended our platform to have now this new service, K-metrics, for example. So I'm getting to the end of this presentation. I wanted to leave you with 3 pointers to get started on this kind of more team-centric approach to adoption of Kubernetes. So number 1, you can go back to your teams and assess the cognitive load they have today. How well do they understand the platform that they're supposed to use, whether it's Kubernetes or something else, and the abstractions they have to use on a regular basis? How well do they understand them? Or is this causing friction, is causing problems and difficulties? Number 2, you can define your platform, make it more visible, and understand what's the gap between, we have this Kubernetes implementation, we're using it, but looking at the definition of a digital platform, what exactly is the gap? What are we missing? Do we need better documentation? Do we need to clarify what is the support around the platform? Whatever it may be. So understand what is the gap there. And number 3, think about the team interactions. Do we know who is responsible for what? Is that clear? And who is impacted? And in general, how do we collaborate on new services? And do we have this understanding of what should be happening in terms of the interactions, either collaboration when we're working on a new service or X as a service? Making these team interactions very clear is going to help reduce friction and increase adoption of Kubernetes or whatever technology you're trying to put forward to help your organization. And think about the Airbnb example, and they had some great talks here at KubeCon as well. Their challenges today are not, on the adoption of the platform, are in scaling, because so many teams have seen how useful it was to accelerate their delivery of their services. So today their problem is actually dealing with that huge amount of teams using their platform. So I'm near the end. So there's this slide. If you get the slides, we have a number of examples of companies adopting this kind of platform behaviors. And just yesterday, also published this article, which is based on this talk, or vice versa. So if you want to share this with someone that doesn't have time to see the video, that could be useful. And I want to thank you for attending this talk. Me and Matthew would appreciate if you couldn't give any kind of feedback. So you have the latest version of the slides on the schedule, and if you could give us feedback, that would be great. Thank you very much.
All right, so we've got just a few minutes for questions, potentially. I'd also like to remind everybody, if you would jump on sketch.com at some point here and review the session, that would be super great. So any questions, just raise your hand and I'll bring the mic around.
I'll get you a copy of the book for the question.
Well, that's awesome. Thank you. I'm curious, how much does the book go into cognitive load as it relates to the 4 different types of teams?
Right. So the crucial idea is that we're trying to reduce cognitive load on the stream teams, on the product teams, if you like. And so the other types of teams, that is always their primary goal. So there are different ways. So we talked about platform. Enabling is more in terms of upskilling and reducing the learning curve to gain new capabilities. And we have also complicated subsystem teams sometimes. If you have a piece of software that's really complicated because algorithmically it's very complex, or it's kind of a niche technology, only a few people really have the experience required, then that can help reduce the cognitive load on the stream team that needs to use that subsystem. So that's kind of one of the key ideas in the book.
Definitely love the approach of saying, like, hey, look, we have this platform, let's make it attractive for you. For people who decide to kind of choose their own adventure, how do you kind of outline the definition of done, or if you really want to own your own experience, like what are some of these boxes you say of, here's what you're like really signing up for, from like security, from, like or whatever, like what's typically the list that you like tell people?
Yeah. So one thing is just have good documentation around the platform. And the platform can be also as small as possible. If you're a startup, maybe your platform is just a wiki page saying, we use whatever serverless, and these are the kind of recommended services and defaults or what have you. And if it's a bigger platform, then you need more documentation around, what does it do and how. And just like we've seen, it's also providing the support to the teams to understand how the platform runs. So one pattern we've seen in many organizations is the platform team is also an enabling team, in the sense that some of the time they will be helping the stream teams to better understand the platform and make better use of it, and understand what are the good practices around whatever logging, monitoring, etc.
Sorry, let me clarify. If a stream team decides they do not want to use the platform, how do you communicate the level of ownership in an alternative platform? What are the boxes you typically tell them, this is what this platform would need to do?
So if you have a stream team or product team that wants to take kind of an alternative road, essentially they are then on their own, right? So the platform, it should make it easier to do the right thing for most use cases. It's kind of paving the road. So if a team has a specific reason why they need to go off track, because they need to do something very specific, they better have a good use case for that, and understand we're investing this effort to do that outside the platform. it has to have reasonable benefit for us to do that. But essentially, then they're outside the platform. The other way to see this is the platform should not be, like we said, should not be mandatory, should not be a one-way thinking. So there are examples where organizations, for example, for CI/CD, the platform team will provide different stacks. You want to use Jenkins, or you want to use some other tool for your CI/CD. We provide these different stacks. But if you want to use something else, then you're on your own again. So the platform tries to cater for the different needs in the organization. Does that answer your question?
Not really, but we can talk about this afterwards.
Okay.
All right, yeah, thanks everybody. We're out of time here, so if you want to catch Manuel on the sidebar here, that'd be great, and thanks for coming.
Thank you.